World champion South Africa will not take part in the Rugby Championship. This leaves the Southern Hemisphere Championship greatly diminished 16 days before its scheduled start. SA Rugby cited concerns over player welfare as the Boks had less time to prepare than Australia and New Zealand. Joining us via Zoom is a former Boks captain, Corne Krige. A very good morning, Corne. Thanks for joining us on South African Morning. South Africa will not defend their Rugby Championship title. As a former Springbok captain, how do you feel about that?
Morning. Yeah, obviously very disappointed. If you think with your heart, as most South African rugby supporters do, you know, we're all very disappointed that the decision was made not to take part in the championship. But if you think with your head, it's a totally different story. You know, for once, South African rugby has made a decision that really takes into consideration the player welfare. And, you know, there's probably about 50 million rand in it for South African rugby if they actually do go and play. And if they really went after the money, they wouldn't have looked after the players' welfare. And, you know, if you look at, on average, the guys have played like 40, 50, maybe 80 minutes of rugby, competitive rugby, where if they're going to play against Australia and New Zealand players who've played over 1,000 minutes of rugby, you know, and it just isn't fair on the players. And there's a Springbok brand that's currently sitting at the top of the world rankings, #1 in the world champions. And why would you go and risk that and then take a young team overseas and a player gets injured and, you know, the onus is on SA Rugby to protect their players. So I think they've made the right decision, as sad as it is.
All right, it's definitely the right decision, as you called it, Corne. But what does this mean for the remaining of the teams then in the Rugby Championships? Your thoughts on the likes of Australia, New Zealand, and of course Argentina?
Yeah, look, Australia and New Zealand always play against each other in the Bledisloe Cup. So the first match there was a draw, and they'll probably carry on with that. I'm not sure about what Argentina is going to do. They'll probably just try and slot in and hopefully win one or two of those games. I think a lot of the Argentinian players play in the overseas league, so they probably would have played more rugby in general than the South African teams would have done. We've had the hardest lockdown of all the countries, so, you know, over 108 days, I think, in total for lockdown. And therefore, our players just literally can't be in that shape that they need to be. And rugby is a very, very physical sport, and I think they've made the right decision.
Well, of course, they've made the right decision. This is the Opti Effect, I guess, of SANZAAR and, of course, Australian Rugby Union calling things off already in the Super Rugby competition. The Boks were scheduled to leave this Sunday, and that would mean then a squad of 46 players to have gone, of course, over for the Rugby Championships. This just looks like the Great Track North will definitely be something that is on the cards and in the best interest of South African rugby, Corne.
Yeah, I think this is the first signs that it's definitely going to happen. And, you know, you were talking about the guys getting on the plane, but, you know, the South African players that are really ready to play are the ones that have played in the leagues overseas. And they'd have to go into quarantine for 14 days. It would be absolute, you know, logistically an absolute nightmare. Once they finished playing in Australia, there'd be another 14 days in quarantine. You know, so it's another month of rugby really that they wouldn't have played. So it really is, you know, logistically just impossible for us to put a great team onto the field. And therefore, I think South African rugby made, for once, I'd say, actually made the right decision in terms of player welfare. You know, saying no to 50 odd million rand in terms of revenue, which South African rugby really needs, is not something that would have gone down lightly with the administrators. But yeah, the right decision has been made for player welfare and for, you can imagine a guy breaking his neck or even a guy dying in a scrum. You know, the ramifications of that would just be incredible. So I think they've made a great decision for the players.
Just last words from you, Corne, on Super Rugby unlocked, I beg your pardon, that has got the domestic competition underway here, and of course looking ahead to the British and Irish Lions tour early next year.
Yeah, we're 8 months away from the British and Irish Lions arriving in South Africa, and, you know, we wouldn't want to risk too many players getting injured. We've already without Handré Pollard, Lode Jager, RG Snyman. There's a couple of serious contenders that will definitely be in that team for next year. So really a high risk to get involved in any rugby now. But we have to get the players into shape. And yes, we have to play, and we're probably going to play for the first time in South African history. I think we're going to play right through Christmas and New Year, which I did when I played in Europe. It's actually incredible to play the day after Christmas on Boxing Day. But yeah, so we're going to have to get used to that. The players are going to have to get used to playing in 30, 40 degree heat. And it's going to be interesting times. But I think the move north is a positive one. And logistically, it's a much better one for us. And obviously, the rand, pound, and the euro is much better. So it's going to put South African rugby in a very good position.
Thanks for your time, Corne. That was a former Boks captain, Corne Krige, joining us via Zoom. And speaking, of course, about the Springboks pulling out of the Rugby Championship, saying that Saru definitely called the right shot. Back to you, Yuveka.